This is Your Kick-Ass Life podcast, episode number 225 with guest Christina Dunbar.
This is the Your Kick-Ass Life podcast with Andrea Owen, a no BS guide to self-help and badassery. Because ladies, let's face it, life's too short for it to not kick ass. And here's your host, the girl who serves it up straight with a side of crazy, Andrea Owen.
Hey there, ass kickers. Welcome to another episode of the podcast. I am so glad and grateful that you are here. Thank you so much for showing up. And we have a repeat guest today. Christina Dunbar is back again on the podcast. I'm going to tell you a little bit about her in just a second here. Real quick announcement about the Daring Way retreat, or should I say retreats at this point. As I've been mentioning, I am rolling these out. I'm very excited. It is long overdue that I do these retreats. And for those of you who don't know, the Daring Way is a methodology based on the research of Dr. Brené Brown, and I am certified in her work. What it's about, in a nutshell, easy peasy topics like courage, connection, authenticity, shame, no big deal. Obviously, really big topics that we talk about here on the podcast all the time. I love this work. I've been doing it for years privately with clients, and now I'm rolling it out in retreats. So the first one sold out. That retreat is in August. I decided to roll out another one, and that one is almost sold out as well. And I might even do a third this year in 2018. Not totally for sure yet, but if you want in on one of these retreats, definitely go over to yourkickasslife.com/daring-retreat to read all about it and maybe put down a deposit for the next retreat that I have. And of course, that link is in the show notes. I wanted to tell you a quick story that I hadn't exactly planned on telling, but I think I am going to do my own work and push myself out of my comfort zone. For those of you that caught my daily diaries, a few months ago, I did daily podcast episodes where I talked about what was going on for me, both logistically and internally and emotionally. So I went on a book tour. My second book came out January 2nd of this year, How to Stop Feeling Like Shit. And I went on a book tour, and many adventures came about. And a lot of it had to do with my own upper limit stuff and doing the work and getting out of my own way, stepping out of my comfort zone. Again, all things that I talk about here on the podcast. Here's one thing that happened that I didn't anticipate telling this story, but my birthday just passed and I figure I need to do something. I don't need to, but I kind of wanted to do something to push myself a little bit. And along with upper limit stuff, and for those of you that don't know what upper limit stuff is, it's sort of like when you have kind of a threshold or set limit to how much success you can have, how much happiness you can have before you kind of start to freak out. So I was working on my own upper limit stuff. And one of those things was success and the success of this book. So I was talking to the women in my peer mastermind, and one of them, okay, so here's the kind of funny thing. How this started was it wasn't even someone telling me something. That's why one of the many reasons I love peer masterminds so much. And you don't have to be in you don't have to be an entrepreneur or in any kind of specific mastermind. These can be just personal development groups that you're in. And a lot of times you get help by two other people having a conversation, right? So two of the women were having a conversation, and one of them said to the other one, why don't you get out of the way in order to allow this thing to be as big as it needs to be? And I was like, holy shit, what if I did that with my book? What if I allowed this baby to be as big as she needs to be? And here's a couple of important parts. I didn't know what that looked like as in terms of like this whole be as big as it needed to be. For a lot of authors, sort of like the arrival or the kind of pinnacle of success is to be on the New York Times bestseller list. And I've had resistance to that, and I wasn't sure why. I mean, it's kind of obvious. Maybe I'm like, oh my God, if you hit the New York Times bestseller list, it's kind of a big deal. And being a big deal is scary. Again, I was like, trying to psychoanalyze myself, and I finally just like surrendered. And I just thought, okay, I don't know what it looks like, but I'm going to do my best to allow this thing to be as big as it needs to be and surrender to what that looks like. I had no idea what it would look like. And if you've been listening to this podcast long enough, you know I kind of have some issues with surrender, got the word tattooed on my arm in order to remind me. So that's what I did. And I also voiced to the women in my mastermind, like that hit me really hard. I am going to work on that. And truth be told, I wasn't even 100% sure what that actually meant, like work on it. But I just kept repeating it to myself, like get out of the way, allow this to be as big as it needs to be. Allow the energy of this project, this book, to go as far and wide as it needs to go. So that's what I sort of ran with. And this was all leading up to it coming out, like it hadn't even come out with. So this was like late 2017. So then my book came out January 2nd. As I'm recording this, it's been about just over 3 months that my book has come out. And again, I've shared this only with the women in my mastermind and the people that are closest to me, my closest friends and family. As I'm recording this, we now have 13 foreign deals. So that means that my book has been translated into 13 different languages, and it's only been out for like 3 months. So this was, okay, so when the fourth one came in, so the way it works is like, I have my literary agent, and then he has a foreign rights agent. So basically it's this other person who's doing the deals with these foreign publishers. And the fourth or fifth email came in, her name is Taryn, and it's like my literary agent is copied on it, and I'm copied on it, and I'm like, okay, this is like the fourth or fifth one. So I emailed back my literary agent, and I'm like, is this normal? Like, because my first contract was different. They kept the foreign rights. So anyway, whole nother conversation about how that works. But these deals kept coming through, and I'm over here like hands up emoji, like what? And all I know is that I'm getting paid more money, and the book is being translated into another language, and it's all very exciting and feels very grown up and legit. So I asked Steve, my agent, I'm like, is this normal? Like to have this many foreign deals in such a short amount of time. And by the fourth or fifth one, it had only been like a couple of weeks that the book had come out. And he said, not really, unless you're a previous New York Times bestselling author in self-help. You might see this many deals, but this is sort of unusual to have. I forget where we were at that point, like 4 or 5 or 6. And they just kept coming. And so right now it's going to be translated over in China, Korea, Lithuania, Greece, Turkey, Russia, Brazil, Poland, Thailand, Portugal, Italy, the Netherlands, Vietnam, and also we have publications in Australia and the UK, which obviously are in English, but they are foreign deals. And also it's been translated to Spanish. And I guess I got what I asked for. I guess that me working on letting go and because I guess it doesn't get any bigger than that, right? Like getting it out there all over the world. So my baby, How to Stop Feeling Like Shit, is traveling, I suppose, as far as possible on this earth. There are obviously other countries that it hasn't been translated into, but it doesn't mean that it's over. We just got the last deal. I think Vietnam was the last one. Maybe 3 days ago as I'm recording this. So crazy. And it's uncomfortable for me to talk about it because, my own inner critic says, oh, don't brag about it. Nobody wants to hear about that. Like, shh. And as I've mentioned here on the podcast before, I still struggle with shining too bright and things like that. I saw a quote on Instagram or something like, one of those social media platforms that said, shine as bright as you want. The sun doesn't give a shit how bright it burns or something. I don't know why that made me laugh so much, but it's true. So for all of you out there, celebrate your successes. I tell you guys that all the time. So please celebrate your successes, and may I be an example of that. I am over here celebrating the shit out of all of the foreign rights deals and the translations, and that this book is being translated into all those different languages for all of those people to be able to hear it and read it. Oh, another thing that happened. I actually think it's more than 13. I think it's 14 plus the UK and Australia. I don't know. I lost count. But my agent emailed me and said, basically just a really nice email saying that, it makes me so uncomfortable to say this, just saying, you are true self-help talent. And because I had told him about my own inner critic saying like my first book was a fluke and that the other publisher just really liked my brand. And, and he had a good laugh about that. And I say all this to just be really real about it, and that I too, every time something is up-leveled, I have to a lot of times like start doing the work again and telling on myself and owning where my own inner critic is like going nuts and where my own imposter syndrome goes a little crazy and things like that. So there you have it. That was a story in my own discomfort. And yeah, okay, I think that's it. All right, so today's guest. Repeat guest, Christina Dunbar is here. I'm so excited. And here's one of the main reasons I love Christina, and I'm so happy to bring her back on the podcast. She just oozes creativity. And I love that she has dedicated her life into healing from that place and using creativity to own so many things that our culture deems as unacceptable and, unfeminine, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I would love for you to go and check her out over at ChristinaDunbar.com and, of course, check out this episode. So let me tell you a little more about her. Christina Dunbar is a performing artist, poet, producer, and mentor to creative women. She is the playwright and star of Dirty Me Divine, a one-woman show about sexuality and soul, directed by her husband, Chaim Dunbar. Christina is also creator of She Takes the Stage, where women find their voice through writing and performing personal stories for the stage and performing them live. As a mentor, Christina works with artists and creatives in developing their projects, solo shows, and creative ideas and making them real. So without further ado, here is Christina. Christina, welcome back.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here.
I'm happy to have you. I just knew, when I saw you in January, and of course I follow you closely on social media, and I just knew that first conversation that we had before was not enough, but I had to have you back. And I am pumped to ask you about these topics that I am personally curious about for my own growth and I just love you as a human. So I am just going to jump in, as I like to throw people in the deep end right away. And so and if anyone remembers, I know it was like a long time ago that you were on, but you talk a lot about owning and trusting our sexual energy. And can you tell us how to do this, and maybe even start with why this is a must? Why is this so important to own and trust our sexual energy as women?
Yeah. Well, first of all, sexual energy, that in itself, I think is such a heavy loaded topic.
Yeah. What does that
like
mean?
right
what does
away?
That look like?
Right. Like, I feel like right away we think of shame or bad or yucky or dirty or too much. To me, sexual energy is so much more than sex. It is about being a turned on, lit up, magnetic, attractive woman that owns that and honors that and carries that out into the world so that she can attract people and experiences and be visible and confident in her body and her voice and all of that juiciness, right? That when we see a woman like that, we're like, oh, I like that. I want that.
Some people probably can't put their finger on it, but it's just an energy, I guess.
I think it is feeling beautiful, feeling confident, feeling tall, feeling sexy, feeling like you are, again, attractive and magnetic, I think are the two words that come up for me when I think of sexual energy. It's a turn on. It's creative energy. It is, for me, I think because I come from the background of, as you know, stripping and using that energy in a certain way where I was really just turn myself on and be able to use my eyes and flirt and call people in through sort of dancing with that energy. It became part of me, I think, from that really horrible, hard time in my life where I was like, oh, I feel dirty about this, but I like it. There's a part of me that loves this. And I think a lot of women want it. A lot of women want to use that and carry it into the world. But then again, there are all these layers of, is this bad? Is this dirty? What if I get hurt using loaded. This kind of energy? It's so loaded. So I'm like, where do we even start?
Right. That's sort of what I was thinking too. Okay. So let's back up, because I think a lot of people listening are probably like, yes, I want that. And maybe they admire women who are like that, but where does someone even start? And I know you talk about something you call the wounded female artist. So can you talk about that and what that actually, again, looks like? Because I'm over here making up, like, it's not about, I don't think it's that you're saying that every woman should drop what she's doing and become an artist. Is it something else?
Well, artist is again, another loaded word. I think of an artist as someone who is willing to express the song in their soul.
Okay.
And willing being the key word, because we all have a unique way of expressing things, and we have creativity inside of us, and we have expression inside of us, but we don't necessarily want to put that out into the world because we might be rejected. We might be too weird. We might be too much. And the wounded female artist is, and this is really specific, I think, I want to talk a little bit about living in California and in the Hollywood bubble. But let me back up. The wounded female artist is someone who has, as Brene Brown puts it, art scars. Someone who has been scarred because they have expressed a part of themselves, a part of their artist, and have been shunned or shamed and carried that with them. And sometimes that happens really early on in life. Like I remember for me, I was we had to do a play. I think it was Shakespeare. I was pretty young. I think I was in like 6th grade, and I stuttered and I got made fun of so bad. And I remember from that day on, I was like, oh, it's not safe to use my voice.
Yeah. I'm
going to get rejected, and take that into adulthood and carry that with me. And that was one of my art scars. I have many. I won't go through all of them.
Just real quick, I know that, I think it's Elizabeth Gilbert that talks about this, that it's some great statistic, like 70% of people have some kind of, they can tell you some story that usually stems from when they were children of being shamed about art. And that's why so many people apologize. And like, how many times have we heard like, okay, I'm not good at drawing, I'm a terrible artist, but they have to draw something. I hear it all the time in creative projects.
I know. It's so horrible. I'm like, I want to call bullshit. I feel like so many of us are born with this creative energy. And then specifically working again with women more in the sort of California bubble. But I think this applies to a lot of different women. If you think back to ways that you might have been shamed when expressing yourself, it comes up the story of men. Men have hurt me in some way when I expressed myself. I've either been assaulted or shamed or manipulated, or men in power have made me feel like I'm not enough. And so that's also something that I see a lot of in the women that I work with. And I think it bears mentioning, because I think that, I know for me personally, that has happened a lot too, where I feel like I have been shamed or shunned by some kind of man in power when I'm expressing a part of myself. So
and maybe that's your truth, right? It's not necessarily showing somebody your art.
Exactly. It could be just self-expressing and using your voice. For me personally, it did come up in a lot of different artistic ways. I remember I was in acting class. I just started my acting class, and I took a private lesson with one of my teachers. This is in my one-woman show, and I was at his house, and I was so fresh and so young. And I remember sitting on his couch, and he just stuck his tongue down my throat in the middle of the scene. And I'm like, yeah, gross, right?
God.
So disgusting. And I'm like, oh, but I'm not the only one. Because the more and more I talk to other women, there are stories like this. Again, it's not just for an artist. I can imagine that there are women that have been in corporate, and the whole Me Too movement, women are speaking up and using their voice and maybe feeling like they are not only being shamed, but assaulted or manipulated in some way. So I think it's kind of a mixture of, when I say the wounded artist, I feel like I want to say the wounded female voice.
Yeah.
Right? Like we use our voice and our expression. How many times have we been shot down in some way? And especially because there are so many men in power that we look up to. I know for me, I would just look up to certain men living in the Hollywood world. And I would be like, oh, I want to impress them. I want to be the good girl. I want to do the right thing. Then I would have to get into experience where I was actually hurt in some way by these men.
Hearing you tell that story about that guy that, oh my gosh, yes, I've personally, me too. I've been sexually harassed and just not been taken seriously, et cetera, by men. But to be honest with you, Christina, there have been times that I can think of, I would say equally so, but the ones that stand out to me the most, and maybe it's because I just expect it of men, but the ones that I think stand out to me the most are when I have been shut down by women. And I can think of two occasions, and maybe this is why I ended up working for myself. I can think of two occasions where I was reprimanded and shamed by a woman who was my superior. One in particular, I worked for a company, I was an assistant buyer. And it was like, the way I describe it, it's like the Devil Wears Prada, but for the surf industry. It was this chain of surf shops on the West Coast. And I was very young. I was 23, maybe. And this woman and she was the VP of the company. She was married to the owner, and she was so awful to me. And she told me that it was kind of like for my own good. And I see so much potential in you, and you could have my job one day, and and would like basically spank me in her office, just like what? Awful to me. And I remember sitting in her office crying one day and thinking to myself, if nothing else, I was young too. And I remember thinking, if nothing good comes out of this, at least I know how to not treat people. And I just remember just being completely shut down and being so afraid to say my truth. And of course, at the time I didn't know how to do it in a healthy way, but regardless, I tell that story because I think that there's also women out there listening who have been shut down, whether it's their truth or with their art, by both genders. And I almost feel like when it comes from women, it's like a different kind of hurt. I'm not going to say it hurts worse, but it's like, wait a minute, you're supposed to be on my team.
You're my sister.
You're my sister. What's happening? Ugh.
That's horrible. Oh, I know. I want to like reach through the phone and hug you because it does have a different kind of sting. And isn't that awful? We feel like we expect some of this from men, but not from women.
It probably has to do with the mother wound and things like that.
Totally. Yeah. But it's also a sign of how we are sort of all brainwashed by patriarchy. Absolutely. In a way, and have been taught to compete and to shut somebody else down if they're shining. I can see how that would be part of the whole women thing as well, like in women as well. It's ingrained in us. It's something to dismantle and talk about. And I'm glad you shared that story, even though it's horrible. But yeah, women have come up against this as well. Yeah.
Well, I know that you, and I'm kind of jumping ahead because I have, of course, a set of things that I want to ask you, but I feel like intuitively, I want to go down this path now around shame, because I know that you help women. And please clarify for me, because I might be getting this wrong. Like, do you help women heal their shame through art?
Yes. Well, through storytelling mainly.
Okay.
And also through creative expression, right? Because some of the women art, some of the women that are in my circles now, I used to do it mostly through storytelling, but now I have singers and poets and comedians. So using their voice somehow to express themselves and hopefully heal past wounds and stories, which is so powerful to be witnessed in that. And to work through stuff in a creative space, because then you just get to turn off the left brain and deal with things that might be in your subconscious that you might not normally deal with in your day-to-day life. Yeah.
I love that. And I want to share a quick anecdote about that. And because as people know that have been listening to this podcast for a while, I started my own healing journey probably 11 or so years ago, and it's looked different. And I think most of my listeners, I like to stay in my head. It's safer there.
Yep.
Think my way through it. And also the only thing that was presented to me, and maybe I just was a little bit narrow-minded about it. Like, I thought the way to healing was things like talk therapy and, telling my story, which I do think that those are great modalities of healing. But what was surprising to me, surprising and not surprising, is, just what you were talking about, the healing modality of art. And I incorporate it with the work that I do with women, but I hadn't really experienced it until I started writing, because I don't sing very well. I don't think, here I go apologizing for myself. I'm not much of an actress, but I can write I'm a writer and I write poetry. And for anybody who's been listening for a while, I think it was episode 213. I've read a couple of poems on the air. And episode 213 was when I read my resignation. And it was a poem I read to you. You were one of the first people to hear it when I was in Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. And here's what was interesting about that is that and I've corresponded with you about this before. It was so different for me to read, because I can write on a page and leave it there and never have the words come out of my mouth, which I know a lot of people listening, they love to journal. And I think that's amazing. But when you make this, just the tiny shift of reading it out loud, that was a totally different experience. And for me to read it out loud and make it as a poem, to have it be like a spoken word poem and perform it was, again, another step out of my comfort zone. So what happened, I don't think you know this, Christina, what happened was I read the poem on my podcast, and of course I recorded it alone in my office. And the first time that I read it, I stopped and burst into tears. And I was not expecting that. I just was like, I'm going to read it. I'm probably going to be nervous when I do it, but I was not expecting to cry. And I did have to actually go back and re-record because of the audio quality, something had happened to it. But that was interesting to me. So I'm sure that is not the first time you've heard that, working with women, healing their art.
Yes. Oh my, first of all, I'm so proud of you. I'm over here like, yay, clapping, cheering. It's such a big deal, not only for you, but for others listening, to use our voice and sound. I mean, if you think about sound, it's so old. It's like the oldest way of healing to make sound. And it's got a resonance to it. It's medicine. It's medicine for our soul. But we're so afraid of it. We're so afraid to use our voice. Like, I can totally relate to, I'll just be the girl that writes the thing and then hides it and puts it away and never looks at it, because I used to hate the sound of my voice. I hated it. And again, art scars. Right. I stuttered when I was younger. I could still stutter. I still have sort of higher pitched voice and have all of these things around my voice, but I've learned to use it anyway and to be like, fuck that. You know what? Sometimes I'll just name it. Hey guys, my voice might be a little high pitched today, but that's okay. I'm going for it. There's so much power in not only using our voice, but then the second piece, which you're talking about, is being witnessed. Yeah. Like doing it visibly and being seen and being heard. And I find that with the women that I work with, there's such a transformation in that piece where we are brave enough to be like, this is who I am. Take it or leave it. I am sharing the most tender, vulnerable parts of myself with you. And this is me. I used to go to bed at night wondering if I'd ever be able to do that. And I would cry thinking that I couldn't. I would not want to die. This was my thought process when I was younger. I was like, I don't want to die with my song still inside of me. And my brain would know that I am good enough in some ways to be visible and to be heard, but my heart was so scared.
I hear that all the time, that women, even like when it comes to topics like worthiness, this is, indirectly related to what you were just talking about. They say things like, I know on like a conscious cognitive level that of course I'm worthy of love and belonging, but it's like this deep thing inside me, or I get triggered and something happens and I tumble backwards. I sort of feel like that's just part of the human experience. I don't know. Do you?
Totally. Are you kidding? Yes. And I would say it's almost what you were talking about. You like to think things through. We almost need to, in our healing, this is my opinion, put that part aside, the logical part, the intellectual part that knows we're good enough, and let ourselves be messy and crappy. And just, if we could allow more of that as adults, like when we're kids, we're like, yeah, I'll be silly, I'll be weird, I'll do this, I'll try this, I'll fall, I'll fail. If we could allow more of that into our world and not try to get it perfect or right the first time in using our voice and expressing ourselves, we might stutter. Yeah. We might falter. We might not say the right thing. We might not get it right the first time. We might not be perfect. And the more we allow that, and I always say, allow ourselves to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Yeah. Because that's the thing. I think so many of us want to just feel powerful and confident, we don't want to feel nerves. We don't want to feel anxiety. We don't want to feel vulnerable. We're constantly trying to contain all this powerful energy inside of us. Because we've been taught to sort of be walking zombies, you know. Joseph Campbell talks about the wasteland, where we're sort of just walking around with this glazed look in our eyes, doing the right thing, but not necessarily feeling deeply. So we have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, with feeling the stuff. For me, that was a turning point when I was able to start to like raise my hand and go on stage at an event and talk first and do those little steps to be seen and just turn my mind off, like literally say a mantra of, I'm going to turn off the perfectionist. I'm not going to plan this. I'm going to feel the jitters and just kind of be in that.
I love that you say that to yourself. Yeah.
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 And that was when things started to shift, because then I was also free. You know, the more we turn off that mind when we're speaking, when we're expressing, when we're making art, the left logical planning strategy mind, the more we turn that off, we're free to connect with creative inspiration. And inspiration, right, that means to be in spirit. So then you're being led by spirit. So then things start to flow.
Oh,
that's an exciting place to be in, as an artist, as a speaker, as someone who is using your voice. When you're just in flow, you feel the creative impulse, you feel the hunch to say something or to share something, and you're just being guided by something deeper and bigger. And you have to get past that little hump of I feel the nerves, I feel the anxiety, I don't know what I'm going to say. Let me just be in this, allow this, and see what comes through.
Yes, to all that. And it's so funny because right when you said it's an exciting place to be, my thought that was about to come out of my mouth was that is such a scary place to be. Let me explain.
Right. Yes.
Yes. And in my experience, because I was kind of chuckling to myself when you were saying, like, turn off the left part of your brain that likes to, you know, plan and everything. And that's for me. And I think that this is probably for a lot of my listeners. I am good at that. Like that part of my brain. I'm sure if someone did an MRI, like that is like lit up, always working, you know, that muscle is in shape. And that's my comfort zone right there. Mm-hmm. And, you know, cause I want to plan out all the times I'm going to write poetry.
Yeah.
Get the right paper. That. But then actually what I have learned and have started to exercise is if it's convenient, which it doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. If I'm feeling a moment of inspiration, if something triggers me or something inspires me and I can sit down and write about it, I do it. I think it was maybe a week or two ago, I saw something on Instagram that made me think about something. And I sat down and wrote a poem that I felt was pretty good. And it only took me like 15 or 20 minutes. So I'm like, okay, I'm getting better at this. You know, I'm getting more and more comfortable with it. And I feel like we kind of have these levels. It's almost like a target, you know, it's like in the middle is our super comfort zone. And then there's another layer that's like, okay, I can do this art thing for healing or whatever. Maybe for some people that's journaling or something like that, painting. And then on the next layer is the sharing it with other people. And that part is, I think, still the muscle that is not very strong in me and getting there. But I want to say all that because I want people to pull this tool out. And that you said that you tell yourself a mantra and you say, I'm going to turn off the perfectionist part of my brain. What is something else that people can do as they're starting to like flex that muscle of the healing of your inner artist?
Yeah, I'm literally going to not think. It's I know this is so weird. Okay, just kind of hang with me here because I am so the perfectionist as well, especially when it comes to using my voice, especially because I've been shamed. So I want to get it right. I don't ever want to be rejected again, right? So of course, I want to turn on the perfectionist mind and get it right and be like, ta-da! Mm-hmm. Applause, please. But when I started practicing the just don't think, I mean, yeah, it's terrifying. I'm not going to lie. It's terrifying. You can call it exciting. I just put a different label on it. I think that's a brain shift, a perspective shift that helps me. Like I'm excited versus terrified because it kind of feels the same. Like you're on this roller coaster ride in your body.
I had a client that called it scared sighted.
Oh, I love that. That's what it is. Yeah. And you can ride the wave. Here's another tool because you can either be in what I call the scared child mode, where you're like in freeze mode and you contract and you let that energy overpower you, or you can, and this is a skill, you have to practice using this muscle. You can take that energy and sort of bring it into your voice, put it into your body, and you become the leader versus it leading you. It's still inside of you, but again, I know it takes a little bit of skill and practice. So yeah, I say not thinking. I also love to do, this is more practical stuff. I love to do a warm up. Like the warmer my body is, if I'm cold, I can't just go on stage cold, or I don't want to. I prefer to do, and this comes from, I guess, my performance training as well. I like to do a 45-minute warm up where I use my body. Even if I have to stretch and do jumping jacks and run and even if you can only do like 5 minutes of that, that's also, I think, a great way to just get the blood flowing, stop using your brain, get into your body. Of course, breathing, another practical tool. We forget to breathe when we get into that anxious space. Our breath gets really shallow. We don't want to breathe, because if we breathe, we start feeling more. So we're trying to run away from the feeling and get into our head and get into the perfectionist strategy space. But if we allow ourselves to just receive some deep breathing, yes, we're going to feel a little bit more. We're going to drop into the body. And also we're going to start to calm down the nervous system. So those are more practical tools.
I am just still like, holy cow, you warm up for 45 minutes. Like, I would be just like, how now, brown cow, like Ron Burgundy, call it a day.
I love the warm up. I love it. I can't do it now. I'm like, even if I'm only on stage, I did a 5-minute literally poetry thing a couple weeks ago. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to be backstage. I'm the girl that's going to warm up as if I'm on stage for an hour. I need it. I trained myself to love it.
Okay. I want to ask you about the archetypes that you talk about that I think that not only show up in healing and being an artist, but just as a woman. And you talk specifically about the good girl archetype and what you call the sacred prostitute archetype. So I'm just going to give you the floor and tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, the good girl. So you probably remember I used to work with Regina Garapi around this. We had a whole good girl boot camp. So we came up with archetypes around the good girl because we were both such good girls and we had such personal experience with it. We were like, let's break this down.
I think a lot of my people listening can probably really resonate with the good girl archetype.
Oh, yeah. So we deconstructed that a little bit and we came up with these sort of sub-archetypes that would help us name what energy we're in at a certain point. So I'll just go through some of these. We have the judge who sees the world as either good or bad, right or wrong. So there's really no room for nuance or paradox. And that judge is really hard, not only on others, but on herself. And it's really great. I use this also in my artist circles. I can see when someone's being in their judge and just having them name that, like, oh, I'm in my judge right now.
Yeah.
And just be like, okay, that's what's happening for me right now. I'm really judging my performance. Just to name that can be really helpful. So there's the judge. I'll go through these quickly. There's the guilty daughter. That's someone who's really living their life for others, who always wants approval, always wants to people please. There is the scared child, which I mentioned earlier. That's that energy that we get into where it's like fight or flight. We want to cower. We want to be in the corner. We don't want to use our voice. We don't want to stand up for ourselves. So yeah, scared child. And then there's, of course, the perfectionist, which I don't know anything about that. Do you?
No, I don't. I don't think any of my listeners do too. So you can just skip it.
Yeah, we'll skip that one. So yeah, these 4 archetypes just, I think, are important, the sub-archetypes, to be able to speak them out loud and kind of gauge where you're at. As you're, especially, and again, I use this for when someone is using their art or using their voice and being visible. It's so easy to like go perform something like you doing your poem and then perhaps go into the judge or the perfectionist, or again, before maybe using your voice, to go into the scared child. And just to know when you're in the archetypes and take a little deep breath. Oh, I'm in scared child right now. Okay, I'm in contraction mode. What can I do to get out of it? Take a deep breath. Uncross my arms, uncross my legs, do the Wonder Woman pose, right? Where you just do that for 5 seconds and you feel a little zing. So those are those archetypes. And then I know you mentioned the sacred prostitute. Do you want me to?
I don't know if I've heard you talk about this before, so I'm curious.
Yeah. Well, when I was doing my show, actually even before that, I was like the spiritual stripper.
Okay. You mean like as like the character in your show, or in real life you were the spiritual stripper?
Actually in real life,
okay.
I would be the stripper that was flying to Vegas, because that's where I used to dance. And I would be reading Carolyn Bass or Brené Brown on the airplane, just like trying to get as much food and nourishment for my soul as possible.
I'll bet there's a lot of strippers who read self-help.
I'm sure. Yeah. Strippers are, I was just saying this, I give it up to strippers, man. They are incredible. I could go on a whole riff on that. But anyway, so I started to really get into Carolyn Mace. She was one of my spiritual teachers. And that's when I started to learn about the prostitute archetype. And there's the sacred prostitute, and then there's just the prostitute archetype, which is the prostitute archetype is when you're selling a piece of your soul in exchange for some kind of security. And I think most of us have been there. And I particularly at that time was dancing. And so I was like, oh, I'm really in it. And I'm actually using sort of sexual energy to be in that archetype. I didn't love what I was doing. Some women do. I did not. So I felt like I was selling a piece of my soul for security. But you can be in a job you don't love. You can be in a marriage or relationship. Exactly. The sacred prostitute. So this is where it gets interesting for me, because I started to explore the origin of the word prostitute. And so there's the Hebrew word zona. It means both prostitute and prophetess, prophet. The Spanish word puta, aka whore, is derived from the Latin word grave, which is literally a hole in the earth, which refers to the darkness and the void, that time before rebirth. I was really fascinated about the split that came up with the word prostitute, where before it was, it could be referred to as a priestess, and now it's more referred to as something where we feel like it is a dirty thing, where we're giving sex in exchange for money. But the history of the word tells us something different, that there is also something holy and sacred about this word, about sex. And so I started to think about just how much we demonize sexuality. And of course, a lot of women have shared when we get into these juicy conversations about sex, oh, I've had an ecstatic experience, or my orgasm, I felt like the chimes of the angels or whatever, or I felt like this creative inspiration, or I felt free, or of course we can use sex to make a baby. So there's also this creative nature to the word. And so there's a sacredness to sexuality that I found that we just don't really honor in this culture. And I just thought that was fascinating. I love that. So there's a sacredness to being in your prostitute, to being in your sexual energy. I guess I could talk about that for a long time. But
it's all fascinating. And I think that it could go in several different directions. I mean, just one that's been prevalent. Well, I've just been learning a lot about it in terms of feminism. And I feel like it's come, maybe I'm just noticing it more, but it's come more to the forefront of even like mainstream media is, the protection of sex workers. And I am someone who formerly used to, like you were saying, very dichotomous, things are bad and things are good. And people who take off their clothes for money are bad. People who sell sex for money are even worse. And now I'm like, open my mind to actually listening to these people's stories and just the industry in and of itself. It's so fascinating. We've dehumanized those people, I think is what we've done. And maybe we've done it because it's easier for us to do that because it's such a taboo. I think sex still is such a taboo topic in our culture, but it's just been really interesting to me and thinking about it and changing my own mind. And anyway, I think that's a totally different conversation, but it's really fascinating the work that you've done in that. And I will link up as well to Caroline Miss and is
it Miss or Mace?
I call it I've always called it Miss, but don't quote me. It's MYSS.
Yes. I think I actually went onto YouTube once and was like, how do you pronounce her last name? Can you?
Sometimes I just Google that. How do you pronounce? Yeah. Ask Google anything. But okay, I love this conversation. And again, it could go in so many different directions. But I think the last thing that I want to ask you, and I haven't asked a guest this in a long time, and I think I'm going to kind of tweak the question a little bit and ask you what surprises you in the work that you do, your own personal work in healing through artistry, as well as what surprises you about the work you do with women. So two-part question.
I think with the women's work, where a lot of the work was telling stories to heal how much sex came up in when I would ask, what story do you want to tell? What story do you deeply want to tell? What story do you need to heal? How many times sexuality came up, whether it was feeling shame around sexuality or being assaulted around their sex in some way. And also equally how much spirituality came up. It was like sex and spirit were the two themes that would come up over and over again, and many times connected in one story. So that was surprising. And for myself, what was surprising about my healing work? For myself, I just think how many layers are there around shame, and thinking that I've gotten through, and I've worked through a lot of stuff, and then finding another little piece that I can work with. It's interesting. It's interesting to keep finding and peeling away the layers and how much they come up. And I just want to be, I posted this on my Instagram a while ago. I want to be shameless. I'm feeling shameless. I think that again is such a dirty word for some reason. People, whenever I say that, people have, I don't know, things come up for them, but I do. I want to claim shameless in every way, and it's still there. So I work through it.
I find that so interesting. And here's my opinion on that. And of course, take it with a grain of salt, Miss Christina. Because this is the specific work I do, and I'm far from mastery in this, but this brings me comfort in that I feel like it is a huge win to feel triggered by something and feel that wash of shame and be able to move through it so quickly. I mean, for lack of a better term, like a motherfucking boss, because it's like, and it's the same with it. To me, it's very similar to fear. I don't believe that anyone becomes fearless, like absence of fear. I do think it's similar. And if Brene Brown would ever agree to come on my podcast, she won't, because I'm a daring way facilitator. So frustrating. Anyway, I would ask her that. Like, do you think that we can become shameless? Like the absence of shame? I'm a believer that it's part of the human experience. It's just like one of our emotions. It's like happy and joy and disappointment and frustration and all of them.
Oh, boom, bam. You just dropped a gem for me. Like literally, I'm like, oh, you want to know why? Because you mentioned fear. And I'm so with you. I don't believe in becoming fearless at all. I believe in facing fear and being with the fear and dancing with the fear. So why can't I do that with shame? Oh, so good, Andrea. Yes.
Yeah. What if it's the same? And I think that, a huge shift in my own work is, and this is the private work I do, everyone, with women, is teaching you, finding out what your triggers are. And we all have them in different areas of our life. We have them in our intimate relationships. We have them in our friendships. We have them at work. We have them in parenting, with our bodies and appearance, especially for women, et cetera. And when you don't know what your triggers are, you end up being in shame, and you end up staying there. And we also end up doing behaviors that we don't, that's the birth of perfectionism. That is the birth of people pleasing, of isolating and hiding out, of numbing out. So when you know what your triggers are quickly, I'm telling you guys, you'll be sitting there like at a meeting at work or, somewhere, and something will happen and somebody will say something shitty, or somebody will press a button and, even unknowingly. And you're like, motherfucker, I'm in it. Yeah. But that's huge, because you can do things. I'll just tell you what they are. It's self-compassion and empathy, telling your story to someone who's earned the right to hear it. And you can move through it so fast.
Oh, so good. Yes. And I love what you just said about sharing your story with a right for someone else has to hear it. That's really important.
I don't think all shame experiences need that. I think that there's a spectrum of shame experiences. I think, the big ones are the ones that are helped the most when we share it with someone that is sacred to us. But I think self-compassion is huge. I mean, and I don't use this term lightly, but that has changed my life. And I told a story in my book about being in a meeting with my son. We had just moved to North Carolina. It was a brand new elementary school. And I had to meet with he's on the spectrum, and I had to meet with the special ed coordinator, the school principal, and his first grade teacher. I just met these women, and they got his records from the previous school, and we're sitting in this meeting. I don't know anyone there. And these were nice women. Of course I'm thinking like, maybe these could be my friends, because I had no friends there. And they start reading his health history. Colton was diagnosed with blah, blah, blah. And he lives with his mother, his sister, and his father. His mother has a history of alcohol abuse. And I'm like, holy shit, what just happened? And I felt that wash of shame, like being in this room with these people, and felt that immediate need to defend myself, to interrupt them and explain my story and do all these things to try to climb out of this hole of shame. And I knew I was only spent maybe like 5 or so seconds in that place of like, holy shit, please let the floor open up so I can crawl in it and go away forever. And I knew I was in it. And I was like, okay, just breathe and get through it. And because I could have never shown my face there again and just like drop my kid off every morning and like not ever talk to anybody. I could have like brought them cookies every week, like donuts, please like me. I'm really not an alcoholic anymore. But it's like we do all these things that kind of aren't in alignment with who we are. And then, it's just about knowing.
Well, I love the self-compassion piece and self-love because that's so difficult, right? Like I know that place where I just go down the rabbit hole of why, you're shitty, this,
I'm a terrible mother.
And of course we catch ourselves sooner now. We're doing the work and it's still like a practice where I have to like stop, breathe. Like you said, breathe, no sweet thing. You're fine. You're okay. You're safe, blah, blah, blah.
I tell myself that one a lot.
I'm doing the best I can. Yes.
Sometimes I tell myself I'm doing the most I can because sometimes it's not really my best. And I know it, but I'm doing the most.
I'm doing the mostest right now. Let's just make it a joke every time we feel shameful. Like, I'm doing the mostest,
But I'm doing my most.
I love it. I love it.
Oh, my dear. Thank you so much for being on and sharing your wisdom. I just adore you.
Guys, love you so much and just so grateful and for the work you're doing and the art you're now expressing. It's so fun to see you.
And I owe a lot of that to you. And everybody needs to follow Christina on social media, especially on Instagram. It's so inspirational. And all of the links are in the show notes, ChristinaDunbar.com. And I encourage everyone to even go watch your YouTube clips. So great. And as always, I have so much gratitude for those of you listening. I know that your time is sacred and precious. So thank you so much for being here every week. And Christina, any last minute things that you want to say before we say goodbye?
Freak your truth, baby. Freak your truth.
Freak your truth. I'm just going to let that be our closing statement here, everybody. And until next time, I will see you all out in cyberspace. Bye-bye.